Hey guys, welcome back to another Geometry Dash video. Today I'll be going over the best and worst trends in Geometry Dash. Now, I won't be doing this in any sort of top 5 or top 10 order. I'm just going to bring up certain prevalent trends that have appeared in the game throughout its existence, and then I will elaborate on them and discuss whether I think it was a good trend or not. Now, as previously stated, I will only bring up trends that had a relatively big impact on the game, so trends such as adding the pinwheel effect to levels won't be included. So, anyways, let's just get into the video. Alright, so the first trend we are going to talk about is the 9 circles trend. This trend first started back in 1.9 with the level 9 circles by Zobros. It was a really nice level for its time, so much so that it inspired various sequels such as Fairy Dust, Poltergeist, and Problematic, just to name a few. This was cool and all, but it eventually became almost like a plague. At one point, there were so many levels utilizing this newfound neon wave effect that RobTop had to stop featuring them. Now, even though I don't like most 9 circles levels, overall I view this trend in a positive light, because it brought a load of new players to the game, and it also inspired some actually pretty cool reiterations of the effect, seen in levels such as Anaconda, Quasar, and 9 Circle X. In all, because of the impact on the game itself and its original appeal, this trend gets a thumbs up. The next trend on this list is the Flappy Bird trend. Although I don't know when this trend started exactly, all I know is that it was an already well-established trend in the game when I started playing back in early 1.9. This trend involved using the UFO game mode to create levels with gameplay pretty much identical to the game Flappy Bird. There were even a couple of these levels that got featured, such as Flappy Hexagon, Flappy Bird, and Flappy Weird, but the majority of these levels did manage to stay unrated. Thankfully, this trend didn't last too long, and it's pretty much completely dead now aside from the relatively new demon level called Flap by Geostorm. Overall, because of its unoriginality and overall just boring and repetitive gameplay, I'm going to give this trend a thumbs down. Up next, we have Rebirth levels. This is probably one of, if not the best trend in GD in my opinion. I don't really know why, I just love seeing rebirths of levels. This trend has been around pretty much as long as the level editor has been around. It started with Neptune's V2 series and is still a fairly relevant trend today. Levels such as Stalemate Redux, Breakout Redux, and Zyro Akabi are some of the more relevant rebirths nowadays, and all 3 of these levels look absolutely amazing. This trend even got my lazy self to create a full level, Club Set 2017, revolving around this idea of rebirth levels. So, overall, if you couldn't already tell, I'm giving this trend a huge thumbs up. The next trend we will discuss is super slow levels. This was a trend that started back in early 2.0, as this was when the move trigger was introduced to the game. And basically this is when people used move triggers to make the gameplay even slower than it is with the negative speed orange arrow. Although many times the decoration was pretty decent on these levels and or parts, the gameplay was almost always awful and really boring. And although I do think that visuals are a very important part of every level, sometimes even a little bit over gameplay, the gameplay in levels like these is just absolutely horrendous and just extremely boring, and it makes the level not very enjoyable to play, to say the least. So, anyways, if you couldn't tell, this trend gets a definite thumbs down for having overly boring gameplay. Up next on the list we have generic levels. Yup, you guys probably saw this one coming. Anyways, generic levels started to become a thing around mid 2.0. Creators such as Adiel started making really simplistic and pretty empty levels, many of which ended up getting featured. Not only were they getting featured, but since they were pretty easy to make and didn't take much time, they were being released very often. This inspired many other creators to jump onto this trend, and they started to kind of exploit RobTop's high regard for these types of levels, pretty much earning themselves free creator points, as so many of these levels were getting featured. At its worst point, everywhere you looked in the feature section, there were these empty and unoriginal levels, to the point where these types of levels were deemed generic. Now, the formula for these generic levels has definitely gotten much better over time, but they are still way too common, so they almost always look really bland and boring, even today. So, because of this, I'm giving this trend a thumbs down. The next trend on this list is yet another trend that began in 2.0, the boss fight trend. As stated previously, this trend began in early 2.0 because of the addition of the move trigger. At first, this trend was actually pretty boring and, quite frankly, not very good. This is because originally, people just started using the newly added Dragon Monster Sprite as the boss, and then added a bunch of very basic attacks using the move trigger. This was the case for a little while, but then Funny Game released his masterpiece known as Serious. This level revolutionized the boss fight trend, and thus revolutionized the game to an extent as well. Boss fight levels were no longer bland and boring, as people started to come up with their own unique bosses with their own unique sets of attacks. So, in all, with the way that the trend turned out, this trend gets a thumbs up for adding a lot more depth and originality to the game. The final trend I'm going to talk about is the Levolution trend. This is the most recent trend on this list, but it is also one of the least prevalent trends as well. This trend was started in 2.1, and the concept of this was basically this: stop spending so much time creating levels and make simple but unique levels with much less objects. Now, the concept of this trend isn't exactly bad. In fact, to an extent I kind of agree with it, but the outcome on the other hand wasn't exactly great. There were a few levels that followed this trend that were pretty cool, such as Aptic by Darwin, but in the end not too many Levolution levels ended up getting featured because, well, most of them weren't great. I'm not saying these levels were exactly bad, it's just that, for the most part, they were a little too simplistic and weren't exactly very original either. Anyways, overall, I'm giving this trend a thumbs down, not for what it is and stands for, but for the minimal impact on the game and the overly simplistic levels. So that's it. Those are some of the best and worst trends in Geometry Dash. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my opinions on these trends in the comment section below. Anyways, thanks for watching.
Wishing I could rewind time with you back in my room like I do with a movie. Wishing I could rewind time with you back in my room like I do with a movie.